Start. So I want to first of all introduce Dr. Sanjay Pujari. We all know him. He's an expert in infectious diseases. His area of interest is, of course, HIV. And since today our discussion is going to be on HIV, he's just the right person who can, give us all his expert comments. Presently, he's of course very involved in the COVID outbreak. He's working with the ICMR and he's on the task force of the ICMR, helping build up all the consensus and all the data work that is going on. So a lot of contribution is coming in from Sanjay. Our presenter today is Dr. Akshita Gokhale. She's a resident at Ruby Hall, and she's going to talk to us, of course, about HIV, and we'll wait for her presentation. So she's done a written out slide, so that's good for discussion part of it. And Sanjay, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, but I can't see you.
I'm not sharing the video. So.
All right, yeah, that's fine. So Akshita is going to present to us about HIV, and Sanjay, I would definitely like you to intervene and give your comments where they can benefit from the knowledge about HIV. So please do intervene in between and give your comments about whatever discussion. And this is true for everybody. Please put in your comments. This is an interactive session. So while Akshita is presenting, please do feel free to add comments, discuss, pose questions, so that you learn out of this entire engagement. So Akshita, do you want to start off? There is a lot of your audios are muted. If you go at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a mic that is there, and there's a slash on that. You just have to click on that slash, and you become audible to everybody. When you're not discussing, you can unmute yourself so the presenter is not disturbed. So you can just sort of mute or unmute from the bottom. There is a mic that is there, and you can mute yourself or unmute yourself from there. Okay. And similarly, there is a video out there. So you can either, make yourself visible, or you can just be invisible and listen on whatever is going. Okay, Akshita, please start off. And Sanjay, please do put in a comment, because definitely they'll be happy to hear you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you really for inviting me. It's really, I'm quite involved in this COVID-19. So getting back to HIV is something which I needed as a, very badly. Thank you.
Please. Okay. Go ahead, Akshita. Akshita, share your screen and start.
Share your screen.
Akshita, share your screen and start. You'd already shared your screen. What happened? Any difficulty? Yeah, okay.
I'm sharing it 1 minute.
Yeah, okay.
See? It's come?
Yeah, it's you. Yeah, go ahead. We can see you.
Yes.
Go ahead, speak.
So, basically the topic is guidelines of the HIV treatment. HIV is a single-stranded positive sense RNA virus. There are two types of HIVs, which you know,
Akshita,
HIV
you have
1
to
and
be close to the mic, because then you'll be audible better, and speak loud.
Yes, sir. So, good evening, everyone. My topic today is guidelines on HIV management. The recent guidelines are of October 2018, released by the NACO. HIV is a single positive sense RNA virus. There are two types of HIV that we know of, HIV-1 and HIV-2.
Please mute yourself so that there's no disturbance in the background. When you want to speak, unmute. We don't have background noise. Yeah.
So we have HIV-1 and HIV-2. HIV-1 has a higher infectivity, it's more virulent, it has a higher incidence of heterosexual spread. The vertical transmission is as high as 20 to 25%, It has a more genetic diversity and a more global prevalence than HIV-2. HIV-1 progresses to AIDS much faster, less than 10 years, as compared to HIV-2. And HIV-1 is more common in India, the most common being group M subtype C. And why is it important to differentiate between HIV-1 and HIV-2 is mainly because HIV-2 has an intrinsic resistance to NNRTI. And that is why we need to the treatment differs if the patient is infected with HIV-2, and that's why we need to differentiate between both of them. Epidemiology and co-infection with HIV-1 and HIV-2 is very limited in India, but there have been reports and cases of HIV-2. We know the structure of HIV, which mainly has a GP120 envelope protein, P24 capsule proteins, the reverse transcriptase enzymes, protease enzymes, integrase enzymes. Now, HIV, India has the third largest burden of HIV in the world, with a prevalence of 2.14 million people living with HIV. The National AIDS Control Organization was started in 92 to prevent and control the infection of HIV. The government of India started free ART on April 1st, 2004. And now India is committed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal of ending AIDS as a public health threat by 2030 with the help of the UN strategy of 90-90-90. 90-90-90 meaning 90% of people living with HIV should know their status, of which 90% should receive antiretroviral therapy, of which 90% should have a viral suppression. Now, NACO has various strategies and algorithms for the diagnosis of HIV. The tests that we use for diagnosing HIV are either we detect antibodies or we detect the virus or the viral products in the blood, the serum, the plasma. We use to detect the antibodies to HIV-1 and HIV-2. We use rapid tests, ELISA, and Western blot. And to detect the virus or the viral products, we use P24 antigen detection and DNA PCR for the viral nucleic acid. According to NACO, the ELISA and the rapid tests that we use, they have to be more than 99.5% sensitive and more than 98% specific. The various strategies that NACO has proposed are, there's a strategy 1, which is mainly used for donation for screening when there is a donation of blood products, organs, tissues, or semen. It's just one test which is done, and therefore it has to be a highly sensitive test so as to detect the positivity or negativity. We do just one test. If it's positive, you consider it as positive, and if it's negative, you consider it as negative. Now, if this sample turns out to be positive, you discard this sample. And if the donor has to be notified that you are HIV positive based upon his prior content, now it is a matter of diagnosis. So once you reach diagnosis, you have a strategy 2 and a strategy 3. Strategy 2A is mainly used for sentinel surveillance. And here, the second, after you get the first test as positive, we do a second test. The second ELISA or the rapid test is done to confirm, but the second test uses a different principle or a different antigen. And the second test has to be more specific. So as to confirm if it's a negative, it has to confirm the absence of infection. So for sentinel surveillance, 2 tests will be required. If the A1 is negative, you report it as negative. If A1 is positive, you do a second test, A2, which utilizes a different system than the first one. Either the principle of the test is different or the antigen which is used is different. If the test 2 as well comes positive, you report it as positive. If the A2 comes as negative, you report it as negative. We have strategy 2B, which is used for clinically symptomatic suspected AIDS cases. For clinically symptomatic patients, we have an A1. If the A1 is negative, you report it as negative. If the A1 is positive, you go ahead and do a A2. If the A2 turns out to be negative, we do a A3. With A3, if A1 is positive, A2 is negative, and A3 is positive, it becomes an indeterminate result. But if A3 turns out to be negative, we report it as negative. So basically, if A3 is negative, we report it as negative. Strategy 3 is used for the diagnosis of HIV in an asymptomatic patient. Here it's similar to type 2, where if the first test is negative, it is negative. If the first test is positive, you do a second A2. If the A2, whether A2 is positive or negative, whether it's positive or negative, we still do a A3. If the A3 is also positive, then it is a positive report. If the A3 is negative, then we divide it into either high risk or a low risk. If it is a low risk and A3 is negative, we consider it as negative. But if it's a high risk, we consider it as indeterminate. Then if the A1 is positive, A2 is positive, and A3 is negative, A1, A2 positive with A3 negative, it is indeterminate. And if A1 is positive, A3 is negative with A2 being negative, it is indeterminate. So if all the three tests are positive, you consider it as positive. And if two tests are positive and one negative, you consider it as indeterminate. And if the first test being positive, the next two tests, A2 and A3 come negative, we divide it into a high risk or a low risk. If it's a low risk, you report it as negative. And if it's a high risk patient, you consider it indeterminate. So what you do for an indeterminate patient is you call the patient 2 to 4 weeks for a repeat testing. If that testing also is determined to be indeterminate, you do these are tested by ELISA and rapid tests. So after 2 to 4 weeks, if again it turns out to be indeterminate, you do a Western blot or a PCR. What you need to know is A1 has to be a highly sensitive test because you need to detect all positive cases. Whereas the A2 and A3, the subsequent tests that are done, have to be highly specific because you have to confirm the absence of the infection or you have to identify the true negatives. This is all for diagnosis of HIV-1. For HIV-2, we have the integrated counseling and test centers, which have rapid discriminating kits, so they can differentiate between HIV-1 and HIV-2. But according to NACO, these have to be confirmed by the state research laboratories and the national reference laboratories. So once the patient reports to the ART center with the ICTC report at the ART center, if the ICTC has confirmed HIV-2 reactivity by 2 differentiating kits, if it's done by 2 differentiating kits, you report as it as HIV-2 reactive and no further testing is required. But if the sample has been found to be HIV-2 reactive only by 1 testing kit, then it has to be confirmed by a reference laboratory, either a state reference laboratory or a national reference laboratory. And if the sample is found to be HIV-1 plus HIV-2 reactive at the ICTC, then the sample has to be sent to the designated HIV-2 referral laboratory again. At the referral laboratory, they're going to collect a fresh blood sample and test according to the HIV-2 algorithm, and then report back to the ART center where they will start the appropriate treatment. Now, the antiretroviral therapy or the antiretroviral drugs are basically...
I'm going to stop you over here and let our expert give some comments. So I'm going to ask Sanjay as well as Parimal, who's also joined us, to give us their comments about what they feel, about this.
Yeah, so as you must have noticed, the NACO algorithms for diagnosing HIV is extremely complicated, and it was developed prior to the availability of the 4th generation ELISAs that we currently have. So the current algorithm is the 4th generation ELISA or the combo test. All of us are aware about that combo test, which detects P24 antigen as well as antibodies. And you screen with the 4th generation ELISA. If the 4th generation ELISA is positive, then you do a rapid test. That is, for example, say a TRIDOT test, where you can actually differentiate between HIV-1 and HIV-2. If the 4th generation ELISA is positive and the TRIDOT is positive for HIV-1, then you can safely confirm that the patient is HIV-1 infected and you don't need to really do any kind of Western blot or PCR. If the 4th generation ELISA is positive and the patient's TRIDOT shows HIV-2 and HIV-1 is negative, then you can safely confirm that the patient is mono-infected with HIV-2. The comes if the patient has screening ELISA positive, that is the combo is positive, then you do a tridot. And if the tridot is negative, that means antibodies are not formed and the combo is positive because of the P24 antigen. That means patient is likely to be in the window period when the patient is likely to be in acute HIV infection. There you do an HIV viral load. And if the HIV viral load is very high in million copies, then you actually diagnose acute HIV. As you see here, this is a very simple algorithm. You start with a 4th generation ELISA, then subsequently you screen with a rapid test, and most of the diagnosis is really made up in that way. So this is the current algorithm for diagnosing HIV infection. Thank you.
Parimal, you want to add something? Parimal, you're not audible. You'll have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself from below.
Yeah. Now I think I will be audible.
Yeah.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes,
So
sir.
at my clinic, what we are doing is we do the one with the GP24 as a starting point. So I would like to ask Sanjay if that's the correct approach. So we do the GP24 and HIV 1, 2, all three we get in that kit. And then once it is positive, like either 1 or 2 and the GP24, that's the starting point at my clinic. So I don't know if that's the right way to do it.
So I was sir, specifically mentioning about this only, the 4th generation ELISA, which is basically a combination antigen and antibody. So
Rapid test.
Yeah. So
Card
if
test.
so if you have a rapid test which shows P24 1 and 2 both, then I think it is sufficient as a screening test, and subsequently you can repeat the ELISA by maybe another method. The real issue is we don't need to do Western blots.
Yeah, very correct.
Anybody has any questions? Please put it up before we move ahead. Any questions from anybody? This is interactive. Please don't hesitate to ask questions to the experts.
I'll ask the residents if they are not asking any questions.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So which test are you recommending? Suppose there is a consultant who
Not audible.
not audible.
Now you can. Yeah, we missed you. Please ask again.
Yeah, which test are the residents ordering on their order form when they write to be done? Suppose you come and see a patient, you suspect HIV, you say that you do is HIV testing. A broad statement. So what do they fill up on the forms? People I can see here is one Dr. Karthik I can see.
So
You tell, what do you write on your form? Which test do you write?
4th generation ELISA.
So do you really write that, or you are saying that after you heard this discussion?
We are writing spots
Okay.
actually, sir. The HIV one we are testing in when we write.
So Dr. Sanjay, actually, what should they be writing on the form?
So sir, there is a reflex algorithm which labs follow. So if you write
Okay.
an HIV test and if you just mention 4th generation, they
That
will
is
do
enough.
so
Sure.
they will do the 4th generation and then they will give you the.
So good. So I think that's a take-home message for residents, that when they request for an HIV, they should not just write anti-HIV or HIV test. They should write HIV 4th generation. Am I correct on that?
Yes. So you write an HIV 4th generation, the lab reflexly does the confirmatory test.
Sure. Okay.
we also have Vinith with us. Vinith, you want to add something from the gastro angle that you want to contribute to this? Vinith, can you hear me? Okay, I don't think it's there. Okay, Akshita.
Right. Yeah, we'll
Yes,
go
sir.
to that later, Sanjay, I think, when you come to GI or something like that, because we have to finish on time as well.
Akshita, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So the treatment of HIV basically targets the each various stages of the life cycle of HIV. The HIV virus has a GP120 as an envelope protein which binds with the CD4 receptor leads to the exposure of CCR5 and the CXCR4 co-receptors, which help in the fusion with the host cell membrane, CD4 membrane. Once the genetic material of the virus gets injected into the cell, the reverse transcriptase converts the viral RNA into DNA. The double-stranded DNA then enters into the nucleus and gets integrated with the host DNA with the help of the enzyme integrase. It lies dormant there for many years, after which, once it's reactivated, there is a transcription into RNA which comes out of the nucleus. This RNA gets broken down with the help of protease to form small viral structures which get which reassemble and are exit from the host cell. So we target each stage of this HIV cycle so as to inhibit its cycle. The fusion inhibition, the CCR5 antagonist is enfuvirtide T20. Maraviroc inhibits the fusion of the HIV viron with the CD4 cell. There are reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which are nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, nucleotide reverse transcriptase inhibitors, and non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. Integrase inhibitors, which include raltegravir, eltegravir, dolutegravir. And we have protease inhibitors, a number of protease inhibitors, which are mentioned here. So we have the nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which include.
Sorry, can I just interrupt here, just for academic purpose? Is that
yes,
can you go up on the life cycle? If you see the CCR5 antagonist is Maraviroc, while the fusion inhibitor is T20. So that's the opposite. It's quite academic because none of these drugs are really used currently in HIV therapeutics.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors include zidovudine, lamivudine, abacavir, stavudine, emcitrabine, and diderosine. Zidovudine is used in the dose of 300 mg BD, and its main side effect is bone marrow suppression. It leads to anemia and neutropenia. Lamivudine is used in the dose of 150 mg BD or 300 mg OD, and it has very few side effects, which may include rash. Abacavir is used in the dose of 300 mg BD or 600 mg OD, and it has a chance of hypersensitivity, 3 to 5% hypersensitivity. And the HLA people who have the gene HLA B5071 are more susceptible to the hypersensitivity. And this should never be a re-challenging. Once you stop abacavir, do not restart abacavir because that could lead to an anaphylactic shock. It could be fatal. Stavudine is given in the dose of 40 mg BD, and the main side effects are peripheral neuropathy, pancreatitis, and lipoatrophy. Emcitrabine is given in the dose of 200 mg OD, and there can be discoloration of the palm and the sole as a side effect. Didanosine is given in the dose of 400 mg OD, and it has a similar side effect as similar to stavudine: peripheral neuropathy, pancreatitis, fulminant hepatic failure, and hepatitis. We have a nucleotide reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which is tenofovir, and tenofovir comes in two forms: tenofovir alafenamide and tenofovir diproxyl fumarate. TDF is available in India. TDF is given in the dose of 300 mg OD, and TAF is given along with emcitrabine. TAF in the dose of 25 mg and emcitrabine in the dose of 200 mg. TDF and tenofovir as such has a side effect of kidney dysfunction and bone reabsorption. Non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors basically combine with reverse transcriptase enzyme, and they inhibit it. We have deliveridine, which is rarely used now because of its inconvenient dosing of 400 mg TDS. Efavirenz, used in the dose of 600 mg OD. The main side effect of efavirenz is neuropsychiatric side effects and suicidal tendency. It is said that it should be taken at bedtime to reduce the CNS side effects. Nevirapine is given in the dose of 200 mg OD for 14 days, followed by 200 mg BD. And it can cause hepatitis. It's a severe hepatotoxicity, and even rash. And the rash can also turn to be very severe. It can cause Stevens-Johnson syndrome and toxic epidermal necrosis. Rilpivirine is given in the dose of 25 mg OD, and the major side effect is rash. Itravirine is given in the dose of 200 mg BD. It also causes rash and peripheral neuropathy, and it is given when there is resistance to other non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. And the next class of drug is protease inhibitors. All protease inhibitors, they cause GI intolerance, altered taste, bone marrow disorders, deranged LFTs, metabolic dysfunctions like hyperglycemia, insulin resistance, increased triglycerides, increased cholesterol, that's lipodystrophy. We have drugs which include atazanavir, and all of these drugs usually have to be given with ritonavir, which is a protease inhibitor booster. And ritonavir is given in the dose of 100 mg BD. Atazanavir is given along with 100 mg ritonavir in the dose of 300 mg. Lopinavir is 200 mg lopinavir with 50 mg ritonavir. It's a fixed dose combination. You have to take 2 tablets twice a day. And darunavir is taken in the dose of 600 mg with 100 mg ritonavir. And the next class of drugs is integrase inhibitors. They basically inhibit the enzyme integrase and prevent the integration of the viral DNA with the host DNA. Raltegravir is given in the dose of 400 mg BD. It can lead to myopathy, rhabdomyolysis, fever, diarrhea, rashes, which include Stevens-Johnson syndrome, toxic epidermal necrosis, and hepatic failure. Dolutegravir is given in the dose of 50 mg OD. It can cause headache, insomnia, hypersensitivity, and hepatotoxicity. We have the entry inhibitors. It's Maraviroc, which is a CCR5 entry inhibitor, given in the dose of 150 mg BD, 300 mg OD. And enfuvirtide, which is a fusion inhibitor, which is given subcutaneous, 90 mg BD. Both of these are not really used. So, basically, we have to treat.
A quick comment
yes,
here.
Yes.
The tenofovir alafenamide and TDF both are prodrugs of tenofovir, and tenofovir alafenamide is available in India in 2 formulations, 25 milligram and 10 milligram as well. When you use tenofovir alafenamide with a protease inhibitor boosted, you need to use it in the dose of 10 milligram, while when you use it with a non-boosted protease inhibitor, you use it in the dose of 10 milligrams, 25 milligrams.
Good.
The second is we have another integrase inhibitor available in India called bictegravir. So this is a new integrase inhibitor which is available as a fixed dose combination with the tenofovir alafenamide, emtricitabine, and bictegravir. It's 1 pill once a day. So that is also something which is quite popular in HIV therapeutics.
Dr. Sanjay, can I ask you something? Now, these are all complicated drugs with so many names, so many doses. So if you look at our hepatitis B landscape, there are certain nomenclatures which we go by, like Buvir, Asvir, and so on. So is there a trick to remember these names? How do the residents remember these names? Because there are so many of them and so many doses and so many things to be remembered. And not many of them are treating HIV on day-to-day basis. So
yeah, so
not be well versed.
I agree, sir. The problem with these names is already these are classified into various classes, but essentially we don't use many of these drugs. There are 21 drugs, out of which actually our formulary consists only of 7 to 8 drugs. So we're looking currently because DDI or diadenosine, are all outdated drugs.
Outdated, true.
So we are only, you have to remember is zidovudine, lamivudine, tenofovir, either TAF or TDF, and emtricitabine from the NRTI and NTRTI class. From the boosted protease inhibitors, only atazanavir and darunavir, because lopinavir is no longer used in HIV therapeutics. And in the integrase inhibitors, dolutegravir and bictegravir. So these are the only drugs that we need to remember.
Yeah, your integrase inhibitors seem to have an ending which is easy to remember, and by that ending you can probably know that it is an integrase.
Yeah.
Gravir is the ending for your integrase inhibitors. But for the others, it is not very uniform. That was the point I was trying to
make. Yeah. So we just remember based on whatever formulary is available in India.
Yeah,
that's what is the common regime that you generally choose, when you decide that, what is the approach that you would do let's say somebody comes to you and it's complicated. What would be a starting point to start them?
So currently we have what we call as universal regimens, which are useful for almost 90% of your population. So if there is a truly naive patient who comes to who's HIV-1 positive, HIV-2 for example now, you can give a fixed dose combination which is available as one pill once a day of tenofovir, emtricitabine or lamivudine with dolutegravir or or TAF FTC dolutegravir, or you can have TAF FTC bictegravir. That's all. So you have only two pill once a day pills, one pill once a day with either dolutegravir or bictegravir combined with the backbone of TAF and FTC. So that is the current gold standard.
Okay. Any questions? Please keep asking. All right. Akshata, go ahead.
Sir, yeah. So, NACO says nowadays we have to treat all patients diagnosed with HIV infection have to be started on ART regardless of the CD4 count or the clinical WHO clinical staging or the age group or the subgroup of any population. Now, why you give a FDC is mainly because they are easy to prescribe and they have a better compliance since they are once a day single. According to the NACO guidelines, the first line ART is tenofovir 300 mg with lamivudine 300 and efavirenz 600 mg. Single pill once a day, and because it has a better efficacy and fewer side effects. The alternate regimens that can be used is atazanavir with lamivudine and efavirenz. Basically, all the first line include 2 NRTIs with 1 NNRTI. So, tenofovir, lamivudine, nevirapine, abacavir, lamivudine, efavirenz, abacavir, lamivudine, and nevirapine. If it's a HIV2 have an intrinsic resistance to NNRTIs, that is efavirenz and nevirapine. Therefore, we use tenofovir with lamivudine and lopinavir and ritonavir in the combination of 800 and 200 mg. These are the NACO guidelines. The CDC guidelines, there are once a day pills which have an integrase inhibitor and 2 NRTIs. That is dolutegravir with abacavir and lamivudine, or dolutegravir with emcitrabine and tenofovir, altegravir with emcitrabine and tenofovir, and raltegravir with emcitrabine and tenofovir. And in case the patient cannot take an integrase inhibitor, then we have efavirenz with emcitrabine and tenofovir. If these are the first line therapy. If the first line therapy fails, we have a second line ART where you add a new antiretroviral drug, which is usually a ritonavir boosted protease inhibitor, a new and an unused NRTI, which is usually zidovudine because you're using tenofovir as the first line drug, and you continue the use of lamivudine to decrease the viral load. So the second line therapy would be zidovudine plus lamivudine with atazanavir and ritonavir. And the third line ART, usually the principle is the new drug should have a minimal risk of cross resistance to previously used drugs. So you use an integrase inhibitor with a new protease inhibitor boosted with ritonavir. So the combination is 400 mg raltegravir with darunavir and ritonavir 600 by 100 twice a day. You monitor the patients on ART. Monitor the body weight, the adherence, the clinical monitoring after every visit. You screen for the symptoms of TB in every visit. The CD4 count has to be done every 6 months till the CD4 count reaches greater than 350 cells per cubic millimeter and the viral load is less than 1000 copies per ml. And the viral load has to be tested at 6 months, 12 months, and then after every 12 months. There are specific laboratory monitorings for individual ARV drugs. Like a patient on zidovudine, the side effect of zidovudine is bone marrow suppression, so you should check for CBC. Tenofovir is nephrotoxic, so check for serum creatinine levels. Nevirapine is hepatotoxic, so check for ALT and SGPT levels. All the protease inhibitors are hepatotoxic, check for LFTs. They are lipodystrophic, so check for the lipid profiles. HIV and TB.
So can I just make two
Yes.
quick comments?
Yes, sir.
One is that the current movement is to start with an integrase inhibitors. NACO was also considering to roll out the dolutegravir based regimen in first line in free program, but it got stuck up with this COVID-19 response. The main advantage of starting with an integrase based dolutegravir or bictegravir in first line is you don't get resistance. You don't go to the second line at all. And this is very rare. It's not been reported in naive patients that to develop resistance to this first line regimen. So essentially, you continue perennially that kind of treatment. It's the same like, the resistance to TDF or TAF in hepatitis B is practically unknown. So it's the same thing for HIV now, and you can just continue. If the patient is not showing viral load response, it means the patient is not taking the pills. So that is as simple as that. You don't fail because of resistance. The second important issue. Yes, sir.
Sorry, this second combination of the CDC seems to be very good because both this dolutegravir and tenofovir do not cause resistance.
Yeah.
So there are two which never cause resistance. I would not know about emtricitabine.
Yeah, emtricitabine. The problem is emtricitabine has the lowest potential barrier to develop resistance. You develop it easily if you use it as monotherapy. But when you put it in a combination, you don't develop resistance to emtricitabine as well. The second issue is CD4 monitoring. Once people are starting at higher CD4 counts and people are achieving a CD4 of more than 500, there is no need to do any CD4 count monitoring. That is optional, and we currently have stopped doing CD4 monitoring in our clinics. But what we do is viral loads, and viral load is something which you do at 6 months, preferably every 6 months, and make sure that it's less than 50 copies or less than 20 copies and not 1,000 copies, because 1,000 copies is capable of developing resistance, particularly to the regimens that NACO is recommending. So that also is changed now. And we will be having NACO coming up with a viral load of less than 20 copies as a definition of failure.
Okay, sir. HIV and TB. Patients living with HIV are 26.
Akshata, we can't hear you.
TB. Hello?
Yeah.
You can hear now?
Yeah.
HIV and TB. Patients living with HIV are 26 to 31 times or an average 29 times more likely to develop TB. You do an intensified case finding by using a 4-symptom complex for TB, which includes cough, fever, weight loss, and night sweats. If a person of active TB is detected with HIV, you start antitubercular treatment first. All HIV and TB co-infected patients should be started on ART regardless of CD4 counts. And ART decreases incidence. Starting on ART decreases the incidence, recurrence, and the case fatality of tuberculosis. Patients living with HIV at the ART center are screened for cough, fever, weight loss, and night sweat. If all these are not present, you assess for contraindication with IPT. IPT is isoniazid preventive therapy. If there is no contraindication, if there is a contraindication, you defer IPT. If there is no contraindication, you give an IPT. If the patient has cough, fever, weight loss, and night sweat, you investigate for TB and other diseases. If TB is present, TB is usually confirmed with CNAT because the smear microscopy has a poor sensitivity for detecting TB in patients living with HIV due to less organisms in the sputum. If there is TB present, you treat for TB. If there's no TB, you follow up and consider IPT. Or there are other diagnoses. If it's some other diagnosis, you give the appropriate treatment for that diagnosis. ATT is started according to the RNTCP guidelines. HIV and TB co-infected patients, you have to start ART regardless of the CD4 count. You start ATT first, and within 2 weeks of starting ATT, once the patient stabilizes, you start ART. And rifampicin, HIV with a CD4 count of less than 50, they need to be started on ATT first and then ART regimen within 2 weeks with strict clinical monitoring. The ART regimen, when at the time when TB is diagnosed, you have to give 2 NRTIs with efavirenz. If in your regimen you're using nevirapine, you replace that nevirapine with efavirenz and continue efavirenz even after the TB treatment is complete. And if you add a protease inhibitor, if you're using a second line therapy and you're using a protease inhibitor, you substitute rifampicin with rifabutin. The rifampicin is basically a enzyme inducer, so it increases the breakdown of protease inhibitors. And if raltegravir is being used, either again you substitute rifampicin with rifabutin, and if not, then you increase the dose of raltegravir from 400 mg BD to 800 mg BD. IPT is basically isoniazid preventive therapy, which is given to individuals with latent TB. It is the most effective bactericidal drug, which prevents the progression of latent TB to active TB. It prevents reinfection of TB due to re-exposure, and it prevents the incidence and relapse of TB. IPT basically includes 300 mg of isoniazid with 50 mg pyridoxine, a vitamin B6 OD, for 6 months. It can be given to all patients on ART, even in pregnancy, and it is also given to children of microbiologically confirmed TB mothers. It's basically only not given to patients who were exposed to MDR TB patients or who have been previously treated for drug-resistant TB.
Okay, two quick comments. One is about dolutegravir. Since we are talking about using dolutegravir in
Yes.
first line, can we give it with rifampicin? So yes, we can give it as dolutegravir BID, and this is recommended with rifampicin. So currently, the best drug to use with rifampicin is efavirenz 600 milligrams, and we also have efavirenz 400 milligrams, but that cannot be used with rifampicin. And dolutegravir BID. These are the only two drugs which you can use with rifampicin. Anywhere else, if you are using a boosted protease inhibitor, you have to use a rifabutin-based regimen, and you have to lower the dose of rifabutin to 150 milligram OD rather than 300 milligram OD because of the drug-drug interaction between rifabutin and the boosted protease inhibitor. The second very important issue that you have to keep in mind is you cannot use rifampicin CAF because that also has an interaction at the P glycoprotein level. So when you want to use tenofovir, then you use the TDF rather than TAF in combination with rifampicin. Thank you.
Opportunistic infections in HIV, when the CD4 count is less than 500, we have infections like herpes zoster, Kaposi sarcoma. Herpes zoster is treated with valganciclovir 100 mg TDS for 7 to 10 days. When the CD4 count drops to less than 200, we have coccidomycosis and cryptococcosis, which is treated with fluconazole 200 mg OD. Histoplasmosis is treated with itraconazole. Pneumocystis cerevisiae is a very common complication of HIV, and you use cotrimoxazole in the dose of 800 by 160 OD. Or if the patient is sulfa drug sensitive, you use dapsone 100 mg OD. Toxoplasmosis is also treated with cotrimoxazole, and if toxoplasmosis presents with encephalitis, it's treated with pyrimethamine sulfadiazine. If CD4 count of less than 100, we have infections like CMV, which are treated with valcyclovir. Mycobacterium avium cellulare is treated with clarithromycin 500 mg BD, ethambutol in the dose of 15 mg per kg, with or without rifabutin 300 mg OD.
I'll make just one comment. I agree with
Yes.
most of the recommendations about treating individual OIs, but not cryptococcosis, because cryptococcal meningitis needs amphotericin B with flucytosine. And there's a very interesting and big trial called the ACTA trial, which was published in the NEJM last year, which showed that amphotericin B plus flucytosine for just 1 week and then continuing with the fluconazole is the standard of care for managing cryptococcal meningitis in HIV positive individuals. The second very important practical point is to screen all your HIV patients with a CD4 less than 100 with a serum cryptococcal antigen test, which is a quick test. So if it is positive, then you do LP for the patient, irrespective of whether patient is symptomatic or asymptomatic, and rule out cryptococcal meningitis. If the serum CRAG is positive, but there is no evidence of cryptococcal meningitis, then you treat the patient with high dose fluconazole. And all these treatments are followed by secondary prophylaxis with the same drugs. And these are continued until the CD4 count is either more than 100 or 200 and the viral load is less than 20 copies. Then you essentially discontinue the secondary.
Yes, sir. Prevention of parent to child transmission and ART in pregnant women. NACO recommends lifelong ART treatment for all pregnant and breastfeeding women with tenofovir, lamivudine, and efavirenz 300, 300, and 600, one pill once a day. And the infant of the infected mother has to be given nevirapine for 6 weeks if the mother has been on ART, and nevirapine for 12 weeks if the mother has received ART for less than 4 weeks during pregnancy or before delivery, or if the mother has not been on ART, that means she is present at the time of delivery. Pregnant and breastfeeding women with HIV, all of them who come, like the different scenarios have been given, all of them you initiate ART irrespective of the CD4 count. Women detected during ANC, again you will initiate ART. Women who has been registered in pre-ART care, you will use the treat all policy and initiate ART. Woman who is already on ART, you will continue the same, and gets pregnant, you will continue the same ART regimen. If a woman who comes directly in labor, you will again initiate an ART. And even if she's detected in the postpartum period, you will initiate ART irrespective of the CD4 count. Breastfeeding women with HIV, you give tenofovir, lamivudine, and efavirenz. Pregnant and breastfeeding women, again, who are already receiving ART, we are going to continue the same regimen. And ART for pregnant women who have had a previous exposure to an NNRTI to prevent the parent-to-child transmission. Instead of efavirenz, we are going to give lopinavir and ritonavir. And to the child or to the infant of the mother who is HIV positive, if she presents during, you give a nevirapine prophylaxis for breastfeeding for at least 6 weeks. For breastfeeding infant should be for 12 weeks if the mother has not received any ART during the antenatal period. And the nevirapine dosing, if the infant is less than 2 kgs, you give 2 mg per kg once daily, or 0.2 ml per kg once daily. If the birth weight is between 2 to 2.5 kgs, you give 10 mg OD or 1 ml OD. And if the birth weight is more than 2.5, you're going to give 15 mg OD or 1.5 ml OD. This is for HIV-1. If the mother has HIV-2, it is less transmissible. The mother-to-child transmission is only 0 to 4%. You start the mother on HIV-2 ART, that means on tenofovir, lamivudine, and lopinavir and ritonavir. And the infant should receive zidovudine instead of nevirapine. You give zidovudine for 6 weeks. If the weight is more than 2.5 kg, you give 15 mg per dose twice a day. And less than 2.5 kg body weight, you will give 10 mg per dose twice a day. And the mother who is HIV positive can continue exclusive breastfeeding for 6 to 12 months.
So can I make a comment again here? Again, we are looking at dolutegravir in pregnancy because that is something which is an upcoming drug. So there was a trial called the IMPACT trial. It was presented virtually last month, where they demonstrated that the combination of TAF, FTC, and dolutegravir is the current gold standard for preventing mother-to-child transmission as well as treatment of the mother. So again, it's the same drug which we have been using for first line. So essentially, when I said it's a universal regimen, it's something which can be used in all contexts. The only problem with dolutegravir is if you use it peri-conception, that is prior to conception, there is a small risk of developing neural tube defects. And this is being studied still. And right now, we in our practices just discuss this risk with the mothers who are planning pregnancies and would try to avoid dolutegravir, but use efavirenz in that context. Apart from that,
is it prevented with folic acid, these type of neural tube defects?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, and it was studied in one of the cohorts in Africa where they really did not demonstrate any benefit. because it was perhaps not mediated through folic acid. But this is an open question still, and further information is needed there. So I think the key thing in HIV prevention today is treatment as prevention. That means if you can push down the viral load to less than 20 copies in the plasma, you cannot sexually transmit, you cannot perinatally transmit. So we are looking at what we call as U is equal to U, that is undetectable equals untransmissible. So the goal is to achieve undetectable viral load, whether it's a mother pregnant, whether it is a heterosexual partner or a homosexual person, and you cannot transmit HIV, and you perhaps would be able to treat through and try to control this epidemic by putting everybody on ART and making sure. And that is why that 90-90-90 goal, which you talked about in your first slide.
Doctor, you have actually not touched upon immune reconstitution. Are you going to talk about it in brief?
Yes, sir. So, immune reconstitution, basically when we give ART, when we give a ART and boost the immunity of the patient, I've not written it, sir, in the slide.
Okay. You can tell in a few sentences.
Yes, sir.
Like why is the sequence of tuberculosis, like you were saying that you have to give one before the other?
Yeah, we have to give one after the other. It's basically because basically IRIS is immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome. There's the worsening of the signs and symptoms of the infection. Basically, when we give ART for the first time, the HIV causes increase in the CD4 cell count and improves the immunity of the person, due to which suddenly there is paradoxical there's an increase in the inflammatory response. The immune system of the body gets activated, so non-specific symptoms like fever or worsening of the symptoms in case of TB, like fever, cough, may worsen because of the increased immunity of the patient, and that is what is called as IRIS.
Dr. Sanjay, any comments, expert comments?
Yeah, so the most important practice changing aspect in IRIS is preventing IRIS by using steroids. So there is a trial, and this is currently what we practice. The trial is called the PRED-IRIS study, where patients were randomized with CD4 less than 100 to ART plus steroids versus ART alone, and they demonstrated a decline in the incidence of IRIS in the patients who received ART plus steroids for a period of 1 month, starting with a dose of 1 milligram per kilogram for 15 days, and then 0.5 milligram per kilogram for another 15 days.
Prednisolone.
Yeah, prednisolone. So all patients coming to you with a CD4 of less than 100 along with ART, start them on steroids.
Akshata, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Hepatitis B and hepatitis C co-infection with HIV. Chronic hepatitis B affects almost 2 to 8% of patients living with HIV. So all patients diagnosed with HIV infection should be started on ART regardless of their CD4 count. The choice of regimen in case of co-infection with Hep B and HIV is again, you use nucleoside analogs which have dual activity against Hep B as well as HIV, that is lamivudine and tenofovir, which should be included in the first line ART regimen for HIV infected patients. And because of the higher incidence of hepatotoxicity of nevirapine in a co-infected patient, it is preferable to use efavirenz unless efavirenz is contraindicated. So the preferred regimen is going to be TLE, that's tenofovir, lamivudine and efavirenz. And tenofovir can be replaced with zidovudine if there is a tenofovir toxicity. The second line regimen should also have tenofovir and lamivudine because they will act both on hepatitis B and HIV. Hepatitis B resistance, lamivudine should always be used with tenofovir, or it should not be used at all, because hepatitis B resistance to lamivudine develops very quickly. Hepatitis B resistance to lamivudine develops in 50% of the patients after 2 years and in 90% of the patients after 4 years of treatment, if lamivudine is used alone. Therapy outcomes with using TLE as a combination, the HBV seroconversion occurs in about 11 to 22% of the cases of those cases who are treated with lamivudine. And comparing emcitrabine and lamivudine, the rate of suppression of HBV and the safety profile and the resistant pattern have been very similar. And plus, emcitrabine, this is not provided in the national ART program, and that's why we use lamivudine. Prevention of hepatitis B. All newly diagnosed cases of HIV have to be screened for hepatitis B infection. If HBsAg is positive, that means the patient is infected. You do not need not give any vaccination. Anti-HBs antibody, if it's present in the titer of more than 10 micro international units per ml, that means the patient has protective antibodies. You need not vaccinate the patient. The response to the HBV vaccine is also lower in patients with HIV. Therefore, a double dose of 40 milligrams of vaccine is usually given because it offers more protection. And the infants of HBsAg mothers have to get vaccinated within 12 hours of birth, that is day 0, then at month 1, 2, and 6. 10 milligrams IM and HB immunoglobulin 0.5 ml IM. HCV, hepatitis C in India, 6 to 12 million people in India are infected with hepatitis C, and you initiate ART before HCV treatment usually. The ARV treatment remains the same, that is tenofovir, lamivudine, efavirenz. Side effects of ARV of hepatotoxicity, which are most commonly seen with stavudine, nevirapine, and ritonavir. These drugs are not used at all, and for most of the patients who are co-infected with HIV and HCV, the benefits of starting ART outweigh the risk of the drug-induced liver toxicity, and therefore ART has to be initiated before HCV treatment. And for prevention, there's no vaccine for HCV as such. Then we have a pre and a post exposure prophylaxis. Pre-exposure prophylaxis for the high-risk groups includes emcitrabine 200 mg, tenofovir 300 mg once a day for 90 days. And post-exposure prophylaxis, mainly according to the NACO guidelines, they say tenofovir 300 mg, lamivudine 300 mg, taken within 2 hours of accidental exposure, either at daytime or nighttime, and then 1 tablet OD for 4 weeks. Or it says lopinavir 200 mg, ritonavir 50 mg, 2 tablets taken within 2 hours of accidental exposure, and next 2 tablets take BD for 4 weeks. It's according to the NACO guidelines, and the CDC guidelines say emcitrabine 200 mg with tenofovir 300 mg once a day and raltegravir 400 mg twice a day. That's it, sir.
So as a doctor, get a needle prick, you would obviously be worried. But what is your worry level? Hepatitis B maximum, HIV maximum, or hepatitis C maximum?
Needle prick.
So in other words, which is the one which gets most?
HBV.
Sorry. Yeah. So it's hepatitis B, HIV, and
hepatitis
HCV,
B.
in that order. Yeah. Sure.
So, Parimal, do you have any comments to make about the hepatitis and?
No. She's covered most of it.
Yeah,
So I had a doubt over here.
Just make a simple comment is again dolutegravir has practically no interactions with any of the Hep C drugs. So again we are talking about universal regimen. So you can essentially use DTG, and when you have that combination of tenofovir or TAF in the background, you don't need to worry about HBV also. So everything is covered with this regimen.
Ashwin, you have a question you have just posted on the chat. Would you like to ask it?
When it comes to HIV and hepatitis B co-infection, guidelines apart, would it be more efficacious to give tenofovir, emtricitabine, and dolutegravir over the current TLE recommendation?
So there's no difference because DTG and efavirenz have no action against HBV. So we are talking about the backbone of TDF, which is the gold standard along with entecavir for HBV management. So TDF 3TC is available in both. So that is enough to really suppress HBV.
Okay, Swara, Akshata, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's it.
All right. You finished your presentation?
Yes, sir.
I think it was an excellent presentation. Sanjay, Parimal, closing comments?
No, I think I agree. It was a very
Good
good
presentation.
coverage. Yeah, good coverage of most of the things that is there. So,
Before ending, one last question again for Sanjay. A few words on HIV vaccine.
so right now we don't have an HIV vaccine, and it's unlikely that we will get another vaccine in the next 10 years.
Sanjay, I don't want to let you go before we close. I need 5 minutes for you to tell us where is the COVID thing going, because you're actively involved. Would you like to show your come on video, and we would like to brief us, because it's such a hot topic, and I don't want to let you go before you give us a little overview. Where are we on the COVID? Let me just brief you. Sanjay is actively involved in the COVID program with the government of India and ICMR. So he'll be the right person to brief us about COVID. So please, Sanjay, do tell us about everything.
Okay, so currently, as you are all aware, that COVID-19 testing is happening only in selected target groups of high-risk people, and it looks like the prevalence of COVID positivity is around 3 to 4% in the high-risk groups. We don't know what will be the prevalence in the general population, but right now we don't believe that there is an exponential community spread of COVID-19 happening in India. It is basically in clusters where you can really trace aggressively the contacts. What are the important things which you are going to see in the next few weeks? Of course, is the strategy for post-lockdown, and it's perhaps too early to really predict what the government response will be. But essentially, it doesn't look like we are going to suddenly stop all lockdowns. That is for sure. We would have something called a graded lockdown with various measures for implementing social distancing measures. The other important thing which is going to come up is rapid antibody testing, finger prick testing to detect IgM and IgG antibodies, which can help us in rapid diagnosis of COVID-19 as well as determine the prevalence of infection. Two important things which we have been able to do is recommending hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis for healthcare workers who are involved in direct care of COVID-19 patients, and the recommendation is to use once weekly hydroxychloroquine. There is no data for this, but empirical evidence, in vitro data, and the government's anxiety to protect its healthcare workforce made us give this recommendation. In terms of treatment for COVID-19, there is absolutely no evidence for any kind of intervention. There is only evidence for lopinavir ritonavir, which failed to demonstrate survival benefit in a trial which was recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So essentially, lopinavir ritonavir may not really figure in any future therapy unless it's used in milder illness. Hydroxychloroquine with azithromycin is something ICMR recommends in only severe cases as an off-label use. The most important thing in COVID-19 management is managing supportive care and ventilation. And there is large amount of data from Italy and from China to suggest that non-invasive ventilation is not something which really helps, and there is more lower threshold to intubate patients in this context. The role of steroids is same as what you would do in ARDS, and otherwise investigational drugs include remdesivir, which is another antiviral against the CoV2, and also a drug called tocilizumab, which is basically an IL-6 inhibitor, which tries to prevent the cytokine storm, which you may be able to see in this. So it's quite a uh, ma- fluidic issue here. Things are changing every day, and the calls are being made not necessarily based on scientific evidences, but based on judgments, based on our past experience about dealing with swine flu, for example. And it's uh, COVID-19 is going to change the way we are going to practice medicine, interact in the society for the next 1.5 years at least, till we have a vaccine. So I think social distancing is going to be a major important thing. The main concern with COVID-19, which we realized very recently, is the significant proportion of asymptomatic shedding of the virus and inability for us to really detect that efficiently to try and isolate these guys and prevent further transmissions. So big challenge really. Uh, but we don't know. I was talking to Sanjay when we were talking on phone. Is right now at least we don't see severe SARI patient, that is severe acute respiratory illness patients in our ICUs. Right now we don't know because this would be incubating prior to the lockdown. All those, if there was a community transmission so severe in the community prior to the lockdown, you would have had a lot of SARI cases coming to your ICUs in the hospital. We don't see that, and it's quite intriguing, and further studies are really needed. We don't know whether Indians are immune, have good heterologous immune response because of constant antigenic stimulation, because of the way we live. We don't know whether BCG makes an effect in trying to develop an off-target immune response against other respiratory viruses. All these are interesting questions which we need to investigate.
I have one question for you. We have patients who've been on hydroxychloroquine for either non-diabetic reasons for rheumatological disorders, or we use it even for our diabetic patients. Is there evidence that patients who've been on hydroxychloroquine before have a sort of a milder course and they're protected more, for diabetes, especially if they are diabetic or rheumatological disorder or anything like that? Do they have some kind of a protective phenomenon when they have a milder course?
Okay, so this is not published, but this is basically a blog from a physician involved in the frontline in COVID-19 in Italy, where he writes very interestingly that whatever patients he has seen less COVID and less severe COVID in patients who are HIV positive, less COVID in patients who have underlying lung disease like COPD and asthma, but higher COVIDs in solid organ transplant recipients and lower COVIDs in patients with rheumatologic disorders. So perhaps we may be able to have that, large amount of this lupus and rheumatoid guys maybe using immunomodulator treatment like HCQs, which may have some effect. But this is very preliminary. We don't know really, it is not published, but that looks like a trend that hydroxychloroquine may be something which may be useful, but large trials are being currently run. The WHO is running a very big trial called the Solidarity trial, which is looking at the role of hydroxychloroquine in treating COVID-19.
But if you have to hazard a guess, why would this phenomenon occur? I mean, what is your top of the mind theory that would tell you that why is this happening?
I honestly, even the blogger doesn't hazard a guess. It's practically unknown as why some immunocompromised patients are not getting the severe illness. One of the things maybe they may not be able to mount a cytokine response, because very clearly it looks like most of the severe illness which is happening later on, once the virus has established itself in the lower respiratory tract, is happening because of a cytokine syndrome, a dysregulated immune response. And maybe there may be some problems in these guys trying to mount that.
I know we have short our time, but the reason why I asked you about HIV vaccine, was because after so many years, there is no HIV vaccine and unlikely to be there. But at the same time, people talk about COVID vaccine being able to be produced in a very short time, to be run into trials by January. So what is the difference between these two? Why there is an eligibility for vaccine for coronavirus and not for HIV?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. But if you look at HIV basically interacts, and its pathophysiology is trying to destroy the immune system. And for that, it basically escapes immune system of trying to control HIV, and it overwhelms the immune system. So we still do not know what components of immune system can protect you against HIV. For respiratory viruses, particularly influenza, for example, we basically know that there are neutralizing antibodies. So these are not only antibodies, but they neutralize it. But interestingly, we don't have a vaccine for the original SARS, which is 2002 Hong Kong epidemic. Neither do we have a vaccine for MERS.
MERS, yeah.
So essentially, we don't know what is going to happen, but they have documented in the original SARS, which is quite close to the current virus, is that they have neutralizing antibodies in this, which can provide you immune protection for almost 17 years. So if you recover from this SARS in this SARS-CoV-2, then perhaps that is very clear that you may have uh, prolonged immunity and you can get back to work. So one of the strategies, if you are having a population which is immune, you can slowly ask them to come back to work post lockdown.
I think we're running out of time, and Sanjay, Parimal, all the other consultants who are in the group, as well as all the residents, I think this has been an excellent interaction, and I'm sure we've enjoyed the presentation given by Akshata and all the interaction which have come and the expert comments from Sanjay as well as from Parimal. I would like to thank you for sparing your time and being with us and giving us all the updates. And we look forward to have you with us always and give your comments in future too. And we're going to make this